everyone, ladies, gentlemen, gentle thems, gentle fluids, gentle beings, and however else you may happen to identify. Welcome to the battlefield. I am Rustam, the hero of the Persian Empire, reborn in the modern day to battle evil on the internet. Welcome to the new Persian Empire. It has been a while since we've done one of these streams, hasn't it? It's nice to have a night to just relax and read books. And on this book channel, our favorite book is, as always, the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi. After all, it's got me in it. So, in that vein, we're going to read more stories about my youth today. It would be nice if I had more things to do on these streams, I admit. But I'm not exactly the type to tap the microphone or whisper sweet nothings in people's ear. I don't know that that's me. But in any case, I hope everyone is able to relax and to have a good time listening to me read. I really do. Anyways, let's get to it, shall we? Chapter 90. Navzar reigned for 7 years. He straying away from Minochair's ideals, and Psalms bringing him back on the path of rectitude. After the mourning period was over, Navzar wore the crown on an auspicious day suggested by the astrologers. All of the courtiers swore allegiance. Navzar did not pay any attention to his duties and obligations as a monarch, and whiled away his time in eating and sleeping. He became unjust and did not observe the strict principles of his father. He behaved rudely with his advisors and counselors. Becoming greedy and avaricious, he oppressed the people, who started migrating to other lands. The peasants rose in revolt, and the knights started thinking in terms of another monarch. Navzar became alarmed. He immediately sent a note across to Sam, who was in Sagsar, Mazandaran. After praising the greatness and goodness of God Almighty, he invoked the memory of Minochair, who on his deathbed had advised him to seek the help of Sam in times of difficulty. He implored Sam to rush to his aid with his mighty mace. Otherwise, he feared that there would be no more monarchy in Iran. As soon as Sam received the message, he drew a cold breath. In the early hours of the morning at cock-crow, he set out with his forces and covered 2 stages of journey, where normally one would cover 1, until he reached the capital. Iranian nobles went to him on foot, and everyone spoke bitterly about Navzar, how he had strayed from the path of virtue and had refused to set himself right, as a result of which his kingdom was in a sorry state. They all implored Sam with one voice to sit on the throne of Iran so as to restore it to its pristine glory. They assured him of their loyalty. Sam replied that God would not be pleased if he were to think of becoming king in the lifetime of Navzar, who was of royal blood. He asked the nobles who among them dared to think of such a despicable thing. As far as Sam was concerned, even if Minochair had a daughter, and had she sat on the throne, Sam would still have been loyal to her. If Navzar strayed away from his father's virtuous path, he was not beyond redemption, and Sam was confident of bringing him back to the path of rectitude. He asked the nobles to repent sincerely for harboring such base thoughts. If they acted contrary to their oath of allegiance, they would incur the king's wrath in this world and suffer hellfire in the next. That's not exactly what I would agree with. I say down with the monarchy. If the monarchy breaks its oath to the people, it is the duty of the people to overthrow it with something better. The nobles were deeply moved by this display of selflessness on the part of Sam. They apologized to Sam, expressed their repentance, and pledged their loyalty anew to Navzar. Fools. Sam kissed the ground as he approached the throne. Navzar at once got down from the throne and embraced Sam warmly. Sam pointed out to Navzar that he was the sole inheritor to Faridun's noble traditions, so he must rule in such a just manner that everyone should speak well of him. A wise person does not lose his character for the sake of acquiring wealth and all the material comforts of the world, which, after all, is temporary, and which prevent his soul from progressing towards the realization of God. A beggar and a king are the same after death. When Faridun died, he left noble traditions behind, whereas the accursed Zahak owned nothing but notoriety. Navzar expressed his sincere repentance for his misdeeds, and promised Sam that henceforth he would act in a benevolent manner. This happy rescue from the brink of disaster was celebrated with wine and music for 1 whole week. Sam then asked leave to depart, and just before departure he advised Navzar to follow in the footsteps of the illustrious Faridun, Hushang, and Minochair, who ruled the world with justice and fair play, and scrupulously abstained from tyranny. Sam then left with traditional honors and costly gifts, such as a royal robe, crown, throne, ring, slaves, horses with golden reins, and 2 gold cups full of red jewels. The revolving heavens were not kind to Navzar. His downfall came after reigning for 7 years. Well, that's what happens when you choose to deal in slaves. Chapter 91. Pashang comes to know of Minochair's death and dispatches his army against Navzar. Chapter 91. No, wait, I already read that out. Never mind. Pashang. News reached Turan of Minochair's death and of Navzar going astray. The Turanian chief, Pashang, started thinking of his deceased father Zadsham and his grandfather Tur, of what they had suffered at the hands of Minochair and his knights. He sent for his knights and nobles, such as Agridas, Gersivas, Barman, Kabad, and Visha, who was the commander-in-chief of Pashang's army, and his son, Afrasiab. He talked to them about Tur and Salm, and said that the time for sweet revenge had arrived. Afrasiab's blood boiled on hearing his father, and he vowed to avenge the wrongs done to Turanians by the Iranians. He regretted that Zad Sham, Pashang's father, had not taken any steps to avenge the wrong, otherwise Iran would not have flourished. Pashang felt flattered and ordered invasion of Iran. Afrasiab opened out the royal treasury and freely distributed money among the soldiers as an incentive for the impending campaign. When Agridas saw that preparations had been made, he came to the palace in contemplative mood and reminded his father Pashang that if Minochair was no more, there was the world-renowned knight Sam, besides other valiant knights such as Kashvad and Karan. Zad Sham, Pashang's father, with all his might, had never thought of disturbing the peace that prevailed. It was not advisable to plunge the land into trouble and turmoil. Pashang assured Agridas that if Afrasiab was capable of waging a successful campaign. If a grandson did not avenge the wrongs done to his grandfather, then he did not deserve to come from that illustrious pedigree. He asked Agridas to extend full support to Afrasiab, and advised that the forces should be marched after the rains had fallen, and the pastures had turned green with tall-grown grass, so that the horses were assured of fodder. That would be the right time to advance their forces to the pastures of Amul, and lay waste to Dehistan, where Minochair had played havoc with the Turanian army. Now that Minochair was no more, he did not anticipate much resistance from Navzar, who was not as worthy as his father. The only two Iranian knights to be tackled were Karan and Garshas. When Agridas saw that his father was so determined, he promised, as a dutiful son, to exert his utmost. Chapter 92. Afrasiab comes to fight Navzar. When the pastures turned green with grass, the Turanian knights, reinforced by armies from China, Turkestan, and Kavar, Khorasan, set out with their vast army. When their forces approached Jaihun, Oxus, Javzar came to know of the invasion. He gathered his forces under the leadership of Karan and started for Jaihun via Dehistan. Karan led the vanguard, and Navzar was immediately behind him. Navzar pitched his tent in front of the fortress of Dehistan. Afrasiab, who had reached Armenia in the meantime, entrusted two knights, Shamasas and Kazarvan, with the command of 30,000 soldiers, with instructions to march towards Zabudistan, because he heard the news that Sam had expired, and Zal was busy building a dakma, place of interment of dead body, for him. This news cheered up Afrasiab immensely, who took it as an auspicious omen. He advanced to Dehistan and pitched his tent there. He had about 400,000 soldiers, as against Navzar's 140,000. Afrasiab had a good look at Navzar's army, and sent a camel courier at night with a letter to Pashang, expressing his confidence that Navzar's forces would be easily routed. Moreover, Sam, whom Afrasiab feared, had followed Minochair in death, so there was nothing to worry. Zar-e-Zar was busy constructing a satodan, an internment chamber, for Sam, and was not in a mood to fight. So he hoped that Shahnameh, whom he had sent to Nimruz, Zabul, must already be sitting on the throne, with the crown on his head. The distance between the encampments of the two forces was 2 farsang. 1 farsang equals 3 miles, so they were 6 miles apart from each other. Chapter 93. Kobad gets killed by Barman, and mass battle between the two forces. A Turanian soldier named Barman came out to inspect Navzar's forces and the royal tent. He approached his army chief and volunteered to go for a single combat with anyone from the opposing army. Agriras expressed fear that if an outstanding soldier like Barman were to get killed, it would be a grievous loss to the Turanians. He therefore suggested that some other ordinary soldier may be sent, but Afrasiab was infuriated at the suggestion of Agriras. He exhorted Barman to put on his mailed coat and pick up his bow. He was confident that Barman would win. Barman came in front of the Iranian forces and asked Karan, son of Kava, which knight was prepared to fight him. I keep saying Barman, and it sounds like the Turanians just sent out a barman to fight. Like just a regular dude with his little bar cloth and a glass. That sounds kind of funny, like just a random bartender in the middle of a war being like, okay, who am I fighting? I definitely wouldn't want to cross an experienced bartender. Imagine the bar brawls he must have lived through. Karan looked at his army to see if anyone would volunteer, but no one responded except the aged Kobad. Karan dissuaded his brother from going out because a much younger man deserved to be sent, and since Navzar leaned on Kobad for advice, Kobad's death would be a grievous loss to the Iranians. Kobad replied that the revolving heavens had given him a full life so far, and that everyone was destined to die one day or the other. Nobody goes alive to heaven. From Minotaur's days he had been donning the armor, and even if he were to get killed, the younger and stronger brother would still be alive. He requested Karan to inter his body to an especially constructed imposing dakma after filling his head with camphor, musk, and roses, and be reconciled to God's will. He then picked up a spear and grappled with Barman. They fought bitterly from dawn to dusk. Barman struck Kobad below the belt with his spear. Kobad fell down from the horse and died on the spot. Wow, 1 hit to the Johnson and he's out. Can't say that I blame him, but goodness, that's quite the strike. Afrasiab rewarded Barman then and there with a costly robe, necklace, golden belt, earrings, and royal headwear. Karan now advanced en masse with his army. Garsivaz from the opposite side did likewise. Both the forces were locked in a deadly fight. Karan played havoc with the Turanian forces. When Afrasiab saw this, he switched on his wing towards Karan. No decision was reached even after it was dark. Both the armies retired for the night. Innumerable Turanians were killed, while the Iranians lost 50,000. Karan went to Navzar's tent to report about the day's battle. Navzar wept on hearing of Kobad's death. He prayed that Kobad's soul may rest in heaven, and that Karan may be blessed with long life. Ferdowsi here remarks that the world is such that there is happiness one day and sorrow the next. One cannot avoid death, however much care one takes. The earth's cradle is the grave. Karan told Navzar that Faridun had put the helmet on his head at the time of avenging Iraq's death. Since then he was constantly in armor. If Kobad was killed, he too was destined to go the same way. He prayed for a long life for Navzar, and described how Afraziab brought on his reserve forces when he saw Karan playing havoc with his troops. How Afraziab, by black art, made Karan's sword arm so weak as to be incapable of dealing effective blows. The two armies rested during the night, and resumed battle the next day. Chapter 94. Second battle between Navzar and Afraziab, and Navzar's defeat. Oh no. At sunrise both the armies regrouped themselves and indulged in mass battle. Karan and Afraziab performed outstanding feats of valor for their sides. When Navzar saw that Karan was hard-pressed, he came to his rescue. But Afraziab's luck got the better of Navzar, and the majority of the Iranians were killed or disabled. Navzar felt very sad. He sent for his sons Tus and Gostam, and, with a heavy heart, recalled to them what his father had foretold on his deathbed, that forces from Turan and China would invade Iran and cause much suffering to Navzar. He said that his father's prophecy had come true. Never before in the history of Iran had the Turanian forces invaded in such large numbers. He advised his sons to go to Pars and take the family members from there to Zadku, en route to Mount Albers, where they should take refuge. He advised his sons to go to Pars via Isfahan to avoid detection by the enemy. In this way he hoped that one or two persons of Faridun's descent may be able to preserve their lives. As for himself, he was not sure whether he would be alive to see them again. He was going to try his luck in one more battle, but in case he were to die, they should not feel too sad, but should carry on with the help of able advisors. He pointed out that it has been so ordained from the beginning of creation that one is destined to lick the dust, and another to wear the crown. One who dies in the war is just the same as one who dies on his bed, except the former suffers from injury for a moment, and then everything is peaceful. He gave them plenty of advice. Then he opened out his arms, embraced them, and shed many a tear. A bitter year. After Tus and Gostam had departed, Navzar was left alone, with his heart full of sorrowful thought for the morrow. That really is awful. I think I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Goodness, that was quite the loud yawn. I really need to get better at doing these streams without ending up sleepy myself. Perhaps I'll put on some music. For myself, at least. Okay. That should work. Chapter 95. Third battle between Navzar and Afrasiab, and Navzar's flight toward Dehistan. Both the armies rested for 2 days. Afrasiab gave no respite the third day. The whole night he was busy organizing his troops, equipping them with swords, spears, and heavy maces. On the Iranian side, Karan held the center with Navzar. Taliman was on the king's left. Shapur and Nastu were on his right. On the Turanian side, Afrasiab gave the left wing to Bahman. Forget the music, I guess. It's a bit too loud. Then again, perhaps I should simply lower the volume. There we go, that's better. As the battle progressed, the Iranian right wing was scattered. Shapur stood his ground valiantly until he died fighting. Many Iranian warriors were killed or disabled. With defeat staring them in the face, Karan and the king decided to flee to Dehistan, but the Turanians compelled them to fight every inch of their way out. Navzar succeeded in reaching the fort in Dehistan. Afrasiab ordered Karukan of Visa descent to advance to Pars, where the family members of the Iranians were stationed. On hearing this, Karan informed Navzar of Afrasiab's nefarious design to capture Iranian womenfolk. He sought the king's permission to offer resistance to Karukan. Navzar asked him not to do so because he was the main organizer of his forces. Moreover, Tus and Gostam had already gone to attend to the safety of the womenfolk. The Iranians rested for a while and drowned their sorrow in wining and dining. The knights then suggested to Karan that they should proceed to Pars without delay, to ensure the safety of the womenfolk and prevent them from falling into the hands of the Turanians. Shidus, Kashvad, and Karan finally made up their minds and decided to fight their way to Pars. Karan and his soldiers reached the fortress of Sapid Dez, which was looked after by Gazdahan with a handful of soldiers. This fortress was besieged by Bahman and his troops. When Karan saw Bahman, His blood boiled with the burning desire of avenging his brother's death. He donned his armor, regrouped his forces, and encountered Badman, who was trying to cut off Kharan's retreat to the fortress. Goodness me. I really do seem to keep falling asleep on these streams. I don't know why. But perhaps I'm even relaxing to myself. That could be the reason. Kharan cried to God for help, and without waste of time struck his spear against Badman's belt, which gave way, and at that very instant Badman gave up the ghost. Kharan got down from his horse, severed Badman's head from the body, and slung it onto his saddle. He then killed many of Badman's soldiers, and succeeded in making his way to Pars with his troops. Chapter 96. Navzar runs after Kharan and is captured by Afraziab. When Navzar came to know that Kharan had left, he too decided to follow him in the hope that he may well avoid an evil fate. Afraziab had pursued him with his army, caught up with him, and after a bitterly fought duel, caught hold of Navzar's belt and bodily lifted him from the saddle. Navzar was imprisoned with 1,200 soldiers of his. Ferdowsi here remarks that even if the revolving heavens were to be most intimate with you, you are bound to suffer at its hands sooner or later. It may bless someone with the crown and the throne at one moment, and the very next moment throws him into the depths of darkness and degradation. A point that seems to be his favorite, the fact that no one lives forever, and well, I guess that's pretty much it. A vengeance that persists for so many years. How frightening. Ah. heavens behave in the same manner with friend or foe. Sometimes you get the kernel, and sometimes only the outer skin or shell. Even if it lifts you high up to the clouds, you are ultimately destined to lick the dust. Therefore it is not wise to lose one's heart to this world. You can never be sure of enjoying uninterrupted happiness. This world is an extraordinary magician who always has a new trick up its sleeve. It lifts someone from the depths of the ocean up to the moon, and brings someone down from the moon into the depths of a deep well. Afrasiab next ordered his soldiers to search for Karan in the hills, caves, forests, and in the waters. He was told that Karan had left much before Navzar to look after the interests of the womenfolk, and was also informed of what he had done to Barman. Afrasiab was grieved to hear this, and bit the back of his hand out of sorrow and disappointment. He ordered Visa to harden his heart and go after the killer of his son with a body of hand-picked soldiers. In the course of his pursuit, Visa passed by the spot where his son's dead trunk was lying. He shed bitter tears and ran after Karan with redoubled vigor along with his soldiers. Karan, who got news of Visa's pursuit after him, turned back to notice a cloud of dust at first, and then a black standard appeared, with Visa at the head of his troops. Both the forces regrouped themselves in battle array. Karan had a good look at the Turanian forces, and seeing them in possession of Iranian equipment and armor, knew at once what the fate of the Iranians had been. Visa shouted from the center of his army to Karan that the king had been captured, and that all the territory from Kanauj to Kabul and up to the gates of Bost and Zabulistan was in Turanian possession. He asked Karan where he hoped to seek refuge. Karan told Visa not to brag any more. Nobody dies before his turn comes, and when the time comes to depart, grieving and worrying are of no avail. This is the way of this world, which one day is bound to stop being merciful towards you. If King Navzar was captured and was rendered helpless, the same or even a worse fate awaited the enemy. Having avenged his brother's death at the hands of Visa's son, Karan was now ready to fight Visa himself. Both spurred on their horses and fought each other. Visa could not stand the vigor of Karan's onslaught and turned tail. Karan did not pursue Visa, who went to Afrasiab with eyes full of tears on account of his son's death. War never changes. Chapter 97. The Adventures of Shahnameh and Khazarvan with Merab and Zal. The Turanian forces that came from Armenia proceeded to Zabulistan. Shahnameh went towards Jaihun and then turned towards Sistan. Khazarvan, with 30,000 swordsmen, reached Hirman River. Zal was busy constructing a dakma for Sam in Gudaba. Merab, who was holding the fort in Zabul, and was quite alert and vigilant. He sent a messenger to Shahnameh with a message full of praise for Shahnameh, and wishing him a long life with crown on his head till eternity. He recalled his descent from the Arab Zahak, and sent word that he was not happy with Zal's tutelage, and presently the whole of Zabulistan was in his charge. He professed that he did not want to see the face of Zal, who was busy mourning. taking advantage of his absence, he thought of sending a courier to Afrasiab with costly gifts and presents, as befitted a mighty monarch. Should Afrasiab send for him, and take a liking for him, he would consider it a privilege to stand before his throne and offer him his kingdom. Merab, while throwing Shamasas off his guard in this manner, sent another express courier at the same time to Zal, urging him not to tarry, but to return post-haste, since 2 Turanian knights had already encamped by the banks of Hirmand. He had gained time by offering them gifts and sweet words. Zal started at once homewards, and did not rest by day or night until he reached home. He admired Merab's presence of mind and sagacity for warning him without loss of time. He assured Merab that there was nothing to worry about. Khazarvan, who, according to Zal, was no better than a handful of dust. At nightfall, Zal picked up his bow and discharged 3 arrows, one after another, in such a manner as to fall in 3 different places in the enemy camp. When the day dawned, the enemy were surprised to find 3 arrows, each as massive as the branch of a tree. They all agreed that these arrows heralded Zal's presence in Zabul, contrary to what they had been given to understand originally. Shamasas, who knew Zal's worth, chided Khazarvan for not acting in time. Had he attacked immediately, Merab and his army would have been easily wiped out. Now, with Zal's arrival, things had become very difficult. Khazarvan laughed out Shamasas's fears, saying that Zal, after all, was one individual. His body was not made of cast iron, nor was he Ahriman incarnate. He boasted that he would easily overcome Zal and kill him together with all the notables of Iran. Overconfidence, hubris, such things always precede a fall, don't they? Chapter 98. Khazarvan's and the Kalbad's combat with Zal, and their death at his hands. After the sun had risen, the battlefield resounded with the noise of beating of drums and blowing of bugles. Zal put on his armor and sat on his horse. He led his army into the battlefield until it came face to face with that of the enemy. Khazarvan, armed with a mace and a shield, rushed upon Zal-e-Zar and hit him on the head, due to which the shock of Zal's mailed coat was torn. The knights of Kabul immediately went up to Zal, who put on a new mailed coat and carried his father's mace. As Khazarvan rushed upon him, Zal lifted his mace and brought it down heavily upon Khazarvan's head. The earth turned red with spattered blood. Zal threw Khazarvan's lifeless body on the ground, trampled it under his horse's hoof, and passed along with the intention of encountering Shamasas. Shamas's blood curdled in his veins, and he made himself scarce. A proper coward, I see. Zal saw Kalbad and raised his mace. When Kalbad saw the mighty mace of Zal, he too made himself scarce, along with Shamasas and others. Za lifted his bow, put an arrow in it, and shot it at the belt of Kalbad. The arrow penetrated Kalbad's belt, transfixing him onto his saddle. When Shahnameh saw both the knights dead, he lost heart and turned tail. The Kabuli and Zabuli soldiers killed many Turanians as they were fleeing. In the course of his flight, Shahnameh ran into Kava's son Karan as the latter was returning after putting Visha's battalion to flight. Karan ordered his cavalry soldiers to lift up their lances vertically, so that the battlefield seemed to be one huge forest of cane trees. Karan's lancers played havoc with the Turanian forces. Shahnameh fled, along with a few soldiers who were lucky to escape with their lives. Chapter 99. Afraziab comes to know of Khazarvan's and Kalbad's death, and he kills Navzar and sits on the throne of Iran. Just killing your prisoner of war with no trial. How crude. Not to mention, I'm pretty sure that's a war crime. When news reached the Turanian monarch of the death of his two knights in battle, he became mad with rage, and raved that King Navzar remained alive in captivity, whereas his own knights died in battle. He made up his mind in his frenzy to kill Navzar, so as to avenge the bereavement of Visa, and ordered the executioner to bring Navzar to his presence, so that he may teach him, as he declared, what warfare meant. Navzar realized what fate was in store for him. All the soldiers were surprised, and held conversation among themselves with bated breath. Navzar was dragged bareheaded and barefooted, with his arms tied up, into the presence of Afraziab. As soon as Afraziab's eyes fell upon Navzar, he started talking about the fate that his ancestors Salm and Tur had suffered, throwing to the winds all sense of decorum as to how kings should treat kings. He asked for a sword, and beheaded Navzar on the spot, and left his body rotting on the ground. Thus died one who was heir to King Minochair, and Iran was bereft of crown and throne. Ferdowsi here advises one who is endowed with wisdom and knowledge not to cover himself with the cloak of ambition, because the crown and the throne have seen innumerable persons like him, without favoring anyone for long. Even if your ambition elevates you to a certain status, and you have achieved all that you wanted to, what further do you hope to get out of this gloomy, sorrowful earth, except degradation sooner or later? Wow. Firdosi was quite the pessimist. Or perhaps nihilist would be a better term for him. Navzar's soldiers were dragged next in front of Afraziab. They begged for clemency. When Murthy Agriras saw this, he was very much moved, and came to his brother to tell him that it was not honourable to kill unarmed prisoners of war. Soldiers could only be killed in the course of battle on the battlefield. He implored his brother to spare their lives, and hand them over to him so that he may imprison them in a cave, and post guards to prevent escape. Afraziab relented, handing them over to Agriras with instructions to take them to Sari in chain and irons. Afraziab then took his forces to Rai via Dehistan, and leaving Turan, entrenched himself on Iranian soil. He put on the Kayani crown, distributed plenty of dinars among the soldiers, and began ruling over Iran with a head full of belligerent thoughts and a heart full of revengeful feelings. Chapter 100. Zal and Rustam come to know of Navzar's death, and gather troops for war with Afraziab. I think I'll wait for the ad break to finish before I start with the next war. We've already been through enough blood tonight. More than enough blood, really. Zal and Rustam come to know of Navzar's death, and gather troops for war with Afraziab. When Gostam and Tus heard of their father's assassination, they were shocked. Out of intense sorrow they plucked the hairs and scratched out the skin of their body. In company with other nobles of Iran, they proceeded to Zabul, and implored Zal to gird up his loins to avenge Navzar's assassination. Zal tore his clothes on hearing the shocking news. He wept like a child and fainted. On recovering his senses, he swore that until doomsday His sharp sword would never be unsheathed, his horse would be his throne, and the pointed lance would be the tree under which to rest. The stirrups would be his footstool, and a black helmet would be his crown. The Iranian nobles who were held prisoners in Sari heard that the Iranians were regrouping their scattered forces and were driving wild horses into cities for training them for warfare against Afrasiab under the leadership of Zal, who was freely distributing arms and money among the soldiers. They were scared that Afrasiab would take vindictive measures. So they went to Agridas and told him that Dastan, Zal, and the king of Kabul, together with knights such as Barzin, Karan, Karad, and Kashvad, would soon be coming to avenge Navzar's death. This was sure to provoke Afrasiab into killing all the prisoners. They entreated Agridas to release them, so that they may scatter themselves in different parts of the world, sing the praises of Agriras's nobility, and offer prayers to God for his long life and prosperity. Agriras told them that such a glaringly obvious act of clemency would expose him to the wrath of Afrasiab of devilish nature. He promised to adopt a stratagem that would save their lives as well as his own from his brother's wrath. As soon as Dastan would approach Sari, he would vacate Amul and, in the confusion of retreat, give them an opportunity to join their compatriots. The Iranian nobles expressed their happiness at this gesture and bowed their heads to him out of gratitude. Chapter 101. Dastan, Zal, comes to know of the captivity of the Iranian nobles and dispatches Kashvad to Amul to effect their release. The nobles sent a messenger to Zal to tell him about Agriras's promise that if a couple of Iranian knights would come to Sari, Agriras would put up a show of fight, withdraw his troops from Amul, and retreat towards Rai. With this strategy, they hoped to escape from the mass killing contemplated by Afrasiab. As soon as Zal received this message, he sent for the elders and knights and inquired who was willing to volunteer for such a noble cause. Kashvad at once volunteered to undertake the task. Zal praised him profusely and wished him long life. Kashvad marched his army towards Sari, with Goraza going ahead as a scout. In fulfillment of his pledge, the kind-hearted Agriras retreated with his forces, leaving the Iranian prisoners behind in Sari. On reaching Sari, Kashvad released the prisoners from captivity, provided every one of them with a steed, and returned triumphantly from Amul to Zabulistan. Zal distributed alms to the poor as a gesture of servitude to the Almighty, gave a costly robe to the messenger who had brought the glad tidings, and extended a warm welcome to Kashvad as he approached Zabul. He shed tears of joy on seeing the freed prisoners. Recalling the sad fate of Navzar, he cried bitterly and threw dust on his head. The captive nobles were then taken in state to the city and accommodated in stately palaces such as they were used to in Navzar's regime. Chapter 102. Afrasiab kills Agridas. What a shame. He spared their lives, but was not spared his own. How sad. When Agridas came to Rai from Amul, Afrasiab admonished his saying that it was foolish to mix honey with colocynth, What he meant was that he had ordered Agriras to kill all the captives, since it was not politically expedient to keep a watch on them. A warrior should not be deterred by his intellectual attainments from being ruthless in warfare. Wisdom has no place in a warrior's head, because vengeance and humanitarian feelings cannot go together. Agridas replied, "One must have at least a modicum of shame. When you are possessed of the means to do harm to somebody, fear God and do evil to none, because the throne and the belt of royalty have seen innumerable persons like you, and are not going to be perpetually faithful to anyone. If you dispense justice, you will achieve whatever you want. Doing justice to the good as well as to the bad is better than doing much empty talk about wisdom. Righteous deeds ensure liberation from the clutches of the accursed devil. Neither the lowly nor the exalted people condone harm to an ant for the sake of worldly gains. Nemesis has a very long reach over evil. Do nothing but good if you are wise. Sow righteousness, and you will reap righteousness. Evil deeds, on the other hand, will boomerang upon yourself." Wise words indeed. When Afrasiab heard these noble words, he did not know what to reply. One was cursed with a fiery temper, and the other was endowed with wisdom. How can wisdom enter a devilish brain? Afrasiab was mad with rage, and by way of reply took out his sword and divided his brother in two by cutting across his trunk. Such a wicked, faithless man was he. Chapter 103. Zal goes to fight Afrasiab and makes Zav king. When Zal came to know of Agriras's tragic fate, he declared that it heralded the beginning of the end of Afrasiab. He took some time to plan out his strategy. Then, gathering a vast army, he marched toward Pars. On hearing this, Afrasiab pitched his forces in front of the fortifications of Rai to offer resistance to Zal. Many soldiers on both sides lost their lives. At the end of 2 weeks of ding-dong battle. Ding-dong battle. What a phrase. Zal went into conference with his knights at night to compare the prowess of both the fighting forces. He declared that although knights happened to be the backbone of a kingdom, it was desirable to have someone of royal blood as king. He compared the army to the sailing boat, whose sail and wind were embodied in the person of royalty. Had Tus and Gostam been endowed with royal grace and wisdom, one of them could have become the king, but unfortunately that was not the case. So it was essential to find someone of royal blood, endowed with divine grace and wisdom. The wise men searched high and low, and could find none more deserving than Zav, son of Temas. So now Zal's playing kingmaker as well as warmaker. Karan and other wise men went at the head of their army to Zav, and conveyed to him the glad tidings of his having been selected to wear Faridun's diadem. Wait. Did Afrasiab just run? All it says here is that Afrasiab sent out his soldiers to offer resistance. They fought for 2 weeks. A lot of them died. And then Zal just appointed a new king. And that's it. Chapter 104. Zav reigned for 5 years. Zal installs Zav on the throne and marks out the boundary between Iran and Turan, and Zav dies. On an auspicious day, Zav sat on the throne and reigned for 5 years. He was a wise old man and ruled with justice and benevolence. He did not permit his soldiers to capture or kill innocent persons. There had been a severe drought, and the earth had become parched. Bread had become very dear. Under such conditions, both the forces fought for 5 months. But both sides felt the severe effects of the drought and were on the verge of collapse. They realized that nature's wrath fell upon them as a result of their misdeeds. A messenger came to Zav, suggesting cessation of hostilities and equitable division of the land between the two nations, with a view to lead a life of peace and happiness. Both the sides vowed, after discussion, not to think in terms of vengeance for past misdeeds. It was agreed that from Jaihun onwards all the land towards Khotan and China should go to the Turanians. Karga was to be the border between the two nations. Zal withdrew his forces to Pars. Zav withdrew his forces to Pars. Zal left for Zabulistan, and the Turanians went back to their own land. When perfect peace was established, thunder and lightning heralded the onset of abundant rains, which transformed the parched land into green meadows, gardens, and flowing streams. Ferdowsi here says that if human beings do not develop the characteristics of wild beasts, nature's curse does not fall upon them. Zav celebrated the happy event by thanking God and organizing community rejoicing. After reigning for 5 years, Zav died at the age of 86. So he was 81 when he was put on the throne? Wow. The Iranians were setting up Joe Biden before anyone else ever could have. This Zav was the original Joe Biden. That's funny. Chapter 105. Garshasp rules for 9 years. Garshasp's sitting on the throne, his death and return of Afrasiab to Iran. Zav had a son named Garshasp, who sat on the throne, wore the Kayani crown, and continued to adopt his father's policy of peace. Meanwhile, news reached the Turanians of Zav's death. As per the terms of agreement, Afrasiab had already crossed Jaihun and returned to his territory, but he received no greeting from his father Pashang, who was keen on wreaking vengeance and waging warfare. Moreover, he was extremely sore about Agriras's assassination. As he should be, he did not want to see or speak to Afrasiab. After keeping Afrasiab's messenger waiting for months and years, he told him that had Afrasiab any regard for the throne, he would have valued Agriras's assistance. On the contrary, he shed his brother's blood, whereas Pashang had sent him to fight the enemy. He vowed that he would have nothing to do with Afrasiab and would never see him. When some years passed and Pashang came to know of Zav's death, he sent a message to Afrasiab to cross Jaihun and invade Iran. Afrasiab gathered a vast army, which spread out from Siblanjab to the banks of Jaihun. Just as news reached Iran of the invasion, Garshasp died, and Iran was once again bereft of a monarch. Chapter 106. Zal comes to know of Afrasiab's invasion of Iran, and Rustam asks his father for a war horse and battle arms. We're finally getting to the part where I step into the story. Iran was bereft of a king. All the subjects became nervous and agitated. A delegation of theirs went to Zabulistan and admonished Zal for neglecting the affairs of Iran, ever since Sam died. They pointed out to Zal that the Turanians had already invaded Iran, and begged of Zal to do something about it. Zal-e-Zar replied that in his youth he had performed prodigious feats of valor, but now he felt weak on account of advancing age. He felt confident that the young and upcoming Rustam would now take his place with distinction. He sent for Rustam and discussed with him the possibility of his going on the expedition. He feared that Rustam was not yet mature enough to undertake such an arduous task. Rustam thereupon reminded him of his exploits at Mount Sapan, and also that with the mad elephant. He said that if he were to fear Pashang's son and shirk warfare, he did not deserve to lead an honorable life. A man is one who is not afraid to fight a lion. It is cowardice to spend one's life in eating and drinking and sleeping. Zal, out of fatherly love, tried to dissuade him, but Rustam had made up his mind to play his part in war, for which he wanted a spirited charger strong enough to bear his weight, and a mace much heavier than those currently used to enable him to inflict deadly blows upon his enemies. He also wanted a waterproof, fireproof mailed coat that no weapon could pierce. Rustam felt that if he was provided with these, he would make the enemy lick the dust. So in short, he wanted the sun and the moon at his side. Goodness, I really was quite arrogant back in the day, wasn't I? Then again, let's see if it got results. Zal thereupon brought out the heavy mace of Sam, who had wielded it with deadly effect in Mazandaran, and with which Rustam himself had felled the mighty war elephant. Rustam was very happy to get such a heavy mace. He now only required a spirited charger to be quite ready to go to war. Hey, I still have that mace. It's right here in my hand. Zal was wonderstruck at Rustam's amazing self-confidence, and kept on invoking God's blessings upon him from time to time. Chapter 107. Rustam captures Raksh and leads his army to war with the Faryab. Well, if Raksh was mentioned, it's time for this boy to make an appearance. Maybe let's move him a bit behind. There we go. That looks a bit nicer. Here's the horse. My oldest friend. To be honest, I feel like I might need to do something else though. There we go. I feel like that looks a bit better. I'll go back up top later. Anyways, let's get back to the reading for now. As many horses as there were in Zabulistan and Kabulistan were brought before Rustam. They were all branded with the royal seal. Rustam tested each and every horse by putting his hands over the back and taking his own legs off the ground, so that the weight of his body fell upon the back of the horse. The back of each and every horse so tested gave way, and the horse came down so that its abdomen touched the ground. Just as Rustam began to despair of finding a suitable horse, he noticed a spirited mare followed by a colt which was as tall as its mother and just as heavy. It had black eyes, brownish skin, bushy tail, dark scrotum, and hooves of steel. I don't know why you had to emphasize the dark scrotum, but yeah, that's Raksh for ya. When Rustam saw the spirited mare and the equally spirited colt, he took out his lasso, formed a loop, and was about to throw it round the neck of the colt, when an old herdsman shouted at Rustam not to catch an animal which did not belong to him. Rustam asked the herdsman why the colt, unlike other horses, was not branded, and to whom it belonged. The old man replied that nobody knew who the owner was. They all called the colt Rustam's Raksh, and the mare did not permit anyone to approach its offspring. Rustam threw his lasso and caught hold of the colt's head. The infuriated mare came charging at Rustam like a tigress, and was about to bite off his head. Wow. Your mom was pretty scary, Raksh. Those are some good memories. Rustam gave a mighty roar like a lion, at which the mare was momentarily taken aback. He boxed her head and neck, whereupon she fell down, then got up and ran away to join the herd. I'm not one to condone animal cruelty, but in this instance I feel like, I probably could have handled that a bit better. I'll just say that much. Rustam then tightened his lasso held round the colt's neck, and dragged it close to him, and tested its back by putting his body weight upon it through his hands. The colt did not feel anything, and kept its back as straight as ever. Rustam knew that at last he had found the ideal charger he had been looking out for. He asked the herdsman how much he wanted for it. The old man replied, "If you are Rustam, then sit on it straight away and straighten the affairs of Iran, for the price of the colt is nothing less than the land of Iran." Rustam smiled, and thanked God for giving him the possession of such a priceless colt. He saddled the colt and tested it out by galloping on it till he was quite satisfied that the wonder horse was quite capable of bearing the weight of his mailed coat, helmet, and mace, and was as strong as an elephant. Raksh was considered so wonderful that they used to burn sapand, the plant, at night time around it to ward off the evil eye. Zar felt very happy that his son got what he wanted. He distributed alms to the poor and money to soldiers. A vast army was gathered and taken out from Zabulistan, with Rustam at its head. All the veteran knights were behind him. When Afrasiab received news of this, he led his troops towards the fortifications of Rai. Another army came in waves from Iran. Finally, both forces halted at a distance of 2 farsangs from each other. 1 farsang equaling 3 miles, so once again it's 6 miles apart. Zal conferred with his knights and those from Iran about the absence of any king in Iran. He decided that a man of Kayani blood should be searched for, who would be deserving of sitting on the throne of Iran. He revealed that a wise man had pointed out that there was such a young man named Kaikobad, descended from Faridun, who not only had an attractive physique, but was also just and disciplined. Chapter 108. Zal sends Rustam to Albur's mountain to bring Kaikobad, and he returns with him. Zal instructed Rustam to pick up his mace, take a small body of soldiers, and proceed to Mount Alburz and reach Kaikobad, and not to tarry there unduly long, but to return post-haste within 2 weeks. He should tell Kaikobad that the army had elected him king, and had decorated the throne in readiness for him, since they considered none else more deserving of this honor. The army chose him as king, not the people. Once again, Zal playing the kingmaker. Well, I guess the people did ask him to play kingmaker, but still. No sooner did Zal instruct Rustam, the latter swept the ground with his eyelids, that is to say, he bowed low in obeisance. He then mounted Raksh with great enthusiasm, and was soon in Kaikobad's presence. On the way, Rustam encountered numerous Turanian scouts, and dispatched everyone who came in his way with one blow of his mighty mace. The others fled, and informed Afrasiab, who was infuriated, and ordered one of his veteran and resourceful knights, Kalun, to take some soldiers and pursue Rustam. Meanwhile, Rustam came within a mile of Mount Alburz, where he found a grove of trees and a flowing stream, by the side of which was a throne, on which musk and rosewater had been sprinkled. A handsome young man of heavenly grace sat on the throne, guarded by a posse of bodyguards. When they saw Rustam from a distance, they approached and greeted him, and invited him to be their honored guest. Rustam declined their offer with thanks, saying that he had to reach Mount Alburz without loss of time, to fetch someone who would set right Iran's affairs, now that Iran was occupied by enemy forces. The knights asked Rustam whom he wanted to see, since they knew Albur's region and might be able to guide him. Rustam said that he wanted to see a king named Kaikobad, and wondered if they knew him. The leader of the knights said he would be able to enlighten Rustam if he were to halt for a while at his abode. Rustam thereupon dismounted, and was led to the throne upon which the handsome young man was sitting. This dignitary took Rustam's hand in one of his, and with the other served out wine for Rustam and for himself. He then toasted the health of freedom-loving men. After filling another cup and handing it over to Rustam, he asked him how he came to hear of his name. Rustam disclosed how Zal had entrusted him with the task of bringing Kaikobad from Mount Alburz. He asked the young man if he was in a position to guide him to Kobad. Thereupon the young man smiled and revealed that he was Kaikobad, directly descended from Faridun, and he could recall the name of each and every forebear right up to Faridun. Of course it was in. On hearing this, Rustam came down from the throne and offered felicitations on his own behalf, as well as from Zal, and conveyed Zal's message to him. Kaikobad was deeply touched, and drank to the health of Rustam, who in turn drank to the health of Kobad. Rustam, Kaikobad, and the party sat down to hear a minstrel, who sang to the accompaniment of the flute and the lyre, praising Kaikobad and Rustam, and giving expression to the following sentiments. One should not turn one's face from 5 objects, beginning with the Persian alphabet Sheen, Shab. Okay, so Shab, night. Shahed, beloved. Shad, honey. Shama, candlelight. And Sharab, wine. This world does not behave in a fair and just manner with anyone, so one should not emulate the evil ways of the world. Drink red wine, but abstain from shedding red blood. Since God has made us of clay, we should not develop fiery temper in nature. Red wine is more satisfying than the tears of blood wrung out of an orphan. If our skirt gets soiled with wine, it is preferable to being sober and inviting the curses of an elderly woman. As the minstrel came to the end of his song, and as they came to the end of their bout of drinking, the king's cheeks were flushed, and he revealed to Rustam how he had a dream that 2 white falcons came from the direction of Iran, carrying a dazzling crown, and strutting up to him gracefully, they put it on his head. As soon as he woke up, he was full of hope of wearing the crown, and threw the magnificent party by the side of the flowing stream. Rustam turned out to be the falcon of his dreams. I'm a bird. Rustam was happy that the king's dream turned out to be prophetic. He exhorted Kobad to start immediately for Iran. Kobad jumped onto his horse without delay, and he and Rustam rode post haste, night and day, until they encountered the enemy scouts. Their leader Khalun advanced to challenge Rustam and Kobad. Kobad decided to offer battle to Khalun and his patrolling body, but was dissuaded by Rustam, who said that with the help of his spirited steed, mighty mace, and broad shoulders, and by the grace of God, he was confident of overcoming them single-handed. True to his word, he rushed into the fray, and with every blow of his mace he felled a mounted soldier. He used to lift one soldier and hurl him so violently upon the head of another that brain matter came out the nostrils of both. Wow, that's violent. He would also lift up horsemen bodily from their saddle and hurl them on the ground with such force as to break their neck, head, and spine. Khalun was overawed at this demonstration of Rustam's ferocity and strength. He rushed blindly upon Rustam and drove his spear with such force as to break open the links of his mailed coat. But wonder of wonders, Rustam caught hold of Khalun's spear, wrested it out of his hands, and roaring like thunder drove the spear through Khalun's body, lifted him out of the saddle on the spear itself, and rested the handle of the spear on the ground, with Khalun transfixed on it in the same manner as roasted chicken upon a wire, sheik kebab. Then he dashed Khalun onto the ground, and trampled him under the hooves of Raksh, so that brain matter gushed out of the crushed skull. Khalun's soldiers ran away, leaving the dead body there. Rustam then rode along until he came to a hillside, beneath which was a meadow and a flowing stream. He rested there to arrange for the king to wear the royal robes, crown, and mount a fresh charger. He then rode along and brought the king to Zal during night itself. Zal and the Iranian nobles celebrated Kobad's arrival with merrymaking for a week. Everyone opined that they had not seen or heard of any king so magnificent as Kaikobad. What a story. Chapter 109. Kaikobad sits on the throne and takes his army to fight Afrasiab. On the 8th day an ivory throne was decorated, and the royal crown was hung over it. When Kaikobad sat on it and put on the jewelled crown, all nobles were present, such as Dastan, Zal, Karan, Kashvad, Karad, and Barzin. They all showered pearls on the crown, and then requested the king to give the order to fight the Turanians. Kobad acceded to the elder's desire and prepared his forces for battle. He asked his knights to get armed with heavy iron weapons of war. A royal proclamation was issued, exhorting the knights to fight the Turanians. Those who displayed conspicuous gallantry were promised royal robes from the king, besides God's blessings among them. Rustam was the first to don the armour and come on the battlefield. The Iranians grouped themselves in rank and file. Merab, ruler of Kabul, was on one wing, and Gostam on the other. In the centre were Karan and Kashwad. Rustam was right in the middle of all, in the front of all, and behind him were the experienced knights. Behind these knights Zal posted himself along with Kaikobad. The Kaviani standard of blazing red, purple, and golden hue was held aloft in the front. On the opposite side, Afraziab organized his army with Anjnas and Visa on the right, Shamasas and Garsivas on the left, while Afraziab held the center. Karan came out, roared like a lion, displayed his prowess on the horse, and shouted to the Turanians to send forth someone for single combat. When nobody came forth, he went nearer the ranks of the Turanian army to provoke someone to venture forth to fight with him. At every attack he felled 10 Turanians. The battlefield was littered with heaps of slain Turanians. Coming close to Shamasas, who was roaring like a lion, he rushed up to him, and saying that he was Karan, brought his sword down upon Shamasas's head. Shamasas fell from his horse and died on the spot. Ferdowsi says that such is the way of the ageless revolving heavens. Sometimes it is as crooked as the bow, and sometimes as straight as the arrow. Chapter 110. Rustam's fight with Afraziab, and his lifting the crown from the latter's head, and Afraziab's flight to Turan. When Rustam saw what Karan had done, he went up to his father and asked him where Afraziab stationed himself in the battle. What armor did he wear, and where could his standard be seen? He expressed his keenness to fight Afraziab and drag him alive to the presence of the king. Zal replied that Afraziab was a veritable dragon in battle. He had a black standard and put on a black mailed coat. He covered his forearms with plates of iron and wore an iron helmet. The iron plates were gilded. He was equal to 10 knights in a fight, and never stayed in one place on the battlefield. His height was not less than 80 inches. With such imposing biodata, he cautioned Rustam to be careful. Rustam told Zal not to worry, and assured him that with God's help, he hoped to lift Afraziab by his belt, and carry him thus to the king. He spurred Draksh and galloped towards the Turanian army, and gave a roar. When Afraziab saw him, he was surprised at seeing such a young knight, and asked his knights who the youngster was. One of them replied that he was the son of Sam's Dastan, called Rustam, whom nobody could control, and he carried Sam's heavy mace. Afraziab came rushing on to the front of his army. Rustam advanced to meet him. Both grappled with each other for some time. Then Rustam managed to get a grip on Afraziab's belt, lifted him clean from the saddle, and wanted to carry him like that to King Kaikobad, but due to Afraziab's weight and Rustam's firm grip, the belt gave way, and Afraziab fell heavily on the ground. He was immediately surrounded by Turanian horsemen. Rustam who had the belt in one hand, extended the other hand and lifted Afrasiab's crown from his head. Rustam was disappointed that Afrasiab escaped from his clutches in this manner. He admonished himself for catching the belt instead of carrying him under his armpit. Iranian knights such as Karan, Kashvad, and many others came to Rustam and congratulated him on his daring feat. Rustam told one of them to deliver Afrasiab's crown to Kaikobad, while he himself would play havoc with the Turanians. No sooner had the Turanian leader escaped with his life than he mounted a swift steed and took the shortest road to the desert. As soon as Kaikobad heard this, he ordered his soldiers to fall upon the Turanian army en masse. He himself took the lead and played an active part in the battle along with Zal and Merab. Rustam painted the battlefield red with his mace and sword. Heads kept on rolling just like the withered leaves in autumn. Rustam alone accounted for 1,160 knights. Zal felt happy to see the extraordinary display of valor, strength, and battlecraft by his son. The remnants of the battered and demoralized Turanian army fled toward Damagan, from where they made a beeline for Jaihun River. After resting their weary limbs for 3 days on the riverbank, they crossed over to Turan on the 4th day. Every Iranian soldier was enriched by the spoils of war. When Rustam came before the king after making short work of his adversaries, the king jumped to his feet, embraced Rustam, and made him sit next to him with Zal sitting on his other side. To be blessed and honored with the right hand of the king. Amazing. Chapter 111. Afrasiab narrates the warlike exploits of Rustam to his father and advises him to make peace. When Afrasiab fled, he rested his weary limbs by the bank of the river for a week. On the 8th day he crossed the river to return to Pashang. He told Pashang that he had been ill-advised to seek this war, because society frowns upon a man who goes back upon his word and is guilty of unprovoked aggression. Killing the ruler of a country serves no purpose, because if one goes, another comes in his place. For instance, Kobad, who wore the crown, had vowed to settle old scores, and he had the support, among others, of a young knight descended from Sam, whom Zal had named Rustam. Afrasiab described Rustam's amazing strength and feats of valor. He said that although he himself was acknowledged to be the strongest knight in Turan, he was no more than a mosquito before Rustam. To quote one instance, although not less than 300,000 blows were inflicted upon Rustam's head by the Turanians, these did not produce the slightest effect upon Rustam. Afrasiab, therefore, advised Pashang to seek peace and to restore to Turan that portion of the land which Faridun had earmarked for Iraq. He advised Pashang to waste no time and not to put off till tomorrow what can be done today. He recalled how valiant Turanian knights such as Kalbad, Barman, Kazarvan, Shamasas, Kalun, and then thousands of others had been killed. If Pashang still persisted in fighting, Afrasiab said, the Turanians would not be able to withstand the might of the Iranian knights, such as Rustam, Karan, Kashvad, and Merab. Chapter 112. Pashang's note to Kaikopad, desiring peace. The Turanian leader had tears in his eyes when he heard Afrasiab, and was happy that wisdom had dawned upon Afrasiab now, at least. He selected a wise and intelligent man named Visa, who was incidentally his own brother, to convey his letter to the Iranian king. Well, of course the boy gained wisdom only after he was beaten soundly in warfare. He earned his wisdom the hard way, like a fool. He dictated the letter, commencing with praise to the Almighty God and his divine qualities. He invoked the blessings of this god upon the soul of Faridun, who was the originator of the Iranian and Turanian dynasties. He recalled how Tur played foul with Iraq, and how Minochair fully avenged the wrong done to Tur to Iraq, depriving him of crown and throne. Pashang pleaded that there should be no more acts of vengeance. They should abide by the division of land so justly made by Faridun, whereby the land from Karaga and Mavra-un-Nar beyond Jahun belonged to the Turanians, and Iran was given to Iraq. They should now live in peace in their respective countries. If they still insisted on fighting, not being satisfied with Faridun's partitioning of the land, not only would all of them be destroyed, but they would also incur the wrath of God. Such a slaughter was not worth the while just for the sake of possession of land. Zal's heirs had grown grey, and the soil had become red with the blood of warriors. Ultimately, everyone is fated to wear the shroud in a grave. Wait, no, not heirs, hairs. Zal's hairs had grown grey, and the soil had become red with the blood of warriors. Peace is any day preferable to war. In case Kaikobad was amenable to his proposal, Pashang hoped that the Turanians and Iranians would never again cross the Jaihoon except on friendly visits. The sealed letter was delivered to Kaikopad with costly gifts such as pearls, crowns, golden throne, good-looking slaves wearing golden belts, Arabian steeds with golden reins, and Indian swords in silver scabbards. I think that's where we're going to end, seeing as we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. It is a good place to end, with the war over and peace being made, thanks to Rustam. Goodness. These stories of old super soldiers really are quite something, aren't they? Okay then. I'm just gonna make a few changes real quick. Raksh, I think you're going to have to go home now. Goodbye. Now then, let's see. I don't think we're going to be doing any raids tonight. I think we'll just end it here, nice and simply. I would like to thank everyone who showed up tonight. This was a lovely little stream. This was fun. We should do this more often. Anyways, I'll see you all tomorrow for more Sonic Frontiers. Till then, dismissed, soldiers.